Welcome to the Humanitarian Supply Chain Podcast, the first and only show that actually compares humanitarian aid and private sector supply chains using real cases, real field experience, and the kind of stories you'll never hear in a boardroom. If you are here for honest insights, field stories, and a few laughs at the beautiful mess we call supply chain, hit subscribe, keep listening, and leave a comment. Let's get started. I want you to imagine a world where the ground is shaking, the floods are rising, and you have exactly 6 hours to save 10,000 lives. You need 10 tons of rice, 10,000 doses of cholera vaccine, and a fleet of trucks ready to move across washed out roads. So, do you start writing a tender? Or do you start checking bank references? Do you begin negotiating the price of cement while people are standing in the rain? If you do, you have already lost. In the world of humanitarian aid, time is not just money, time is survival. Now, shift your perspective. Imagine you are in a boardroom of a private company. You are about to launch the most sophisticated vehicle in history. But the global supply of semiconductors has frozen. Your competitors are parking half finished cars in empty fields because they are missing a single $2 microchip. So, do you panic? If you have designed your supply chain correctly, you don't. You look at a pre-negotiated agreements that guarantees you priority access to the world's most advanced fabrication plants. In both of these high-stakes scenarios, the difference between a catastrophic failure and a resilient response is a strategic masterpiece called the Framework Agreement. I have spent my career at the intersection of these two worlds, humanitarian and private sectors. I have navigated the emergency responses and the corporate boardrooms. I have established framework agreements, for example, for aviation services in the heart of South Sudan for action against hunger, and managed water tracking in the Azaz district of Syria for Solidarity International. I have secured food for COVID clinics in Bangladesh for Relief International and established complex agreements for borehole flushing and hotel services in Nigeria and other framework agreements, which, for instance, allowed Solidarity International to respond emergency in Syria in 2019 within 48 hours. So, today I'm going to peel back the curtain on the quiet machinery that keeps our world moving when everything else breaks. This is a 360-degree comparative analysis of how humanitarian aid in the private sector use the exact same logic to solve completely different problems by using framework agreements. In the humanitarian world, we don't just buy things, we prepare to buy them. We operate in a world of extreme unpredictability where we know we will need cement, fuel, and stationery. But we do not know exactly when, where, or how much. A framework agreement, sometimes also called as a blanket purchase agreement or preferred vendor agreement, is our strategic answer to this chaos. It is a pre-arranged, non-binding contract that establishes the rule of engagement, unit price, delivery lead times, and quality standards for the future orders. But here is the most important lesson you will hear today. A framework agreement is not a commitment to purchase. In organizations like Action Against Hunger, we specifically use the term agreement rather than contract to avoid the legal implication of a firm commitment. We are essentially telling the supplier, if the world breaks, here is the price we will pay, and here is how fast you must move. But until we issue a specific order, we don't owe you a single dime. Establishing this shield is a rigorous choreography that balances speed with absolute compliance. Step 1, the need assessment. We don't guess, we look at historical data like the stationery we used in Iraq or the dry food for the health facilities in Damasak. We analyze project plans, estimate their maximum possible volume we might need over the agreement's life. If we underestimate here, we face an administrative nightmare of retendering in the middle of a crisis. Step 2, procedure selection. Framework agreements do not magically bypass procurement rules, they simply front load them. We choose a procedure based on the estimated total value. If I need 2,000 of stationary items in Iraq, a direct purchase will be applied. But if I'm looking at 22,000 of cement for multiple projects, I must trigger a negotiated procedure, collecting at least three competitive quotes. Step 3, supplier selection and the transparency rule. This is the relational phase. We run a competitive process, but we are brutally honest with the bidder. We make it clear that this is no guarantee income and no exclusivity. We might sign identical agreements with three different suppliers for shelter kits in Bangladesh, for example, just to ensure we have redundancy if one warehouse is destroyed. Step 4, agreement drafting. We specify the unit price, the warranties, and the Incoterms, the commercial terms that define who handles the tasks, costs, and risks of transport. Step 5, the call off, the activation. When the disaster hits, like we had in Syria in 2019, the call off happens. We don't negotiate, we don't tender. We simply issue a supply purchase order referencing the framework agreement. Action happens in hours, not weeks. Step 6, monitoring and 2-year rule. We track every cent. If we hit the financial threshold of our procurement procedure, we have to stop and retender. And as a gold standard, we never let these agreements run longer than 2 years. Theory is clean, but the field is messy. Let's look at how these frameworks handle specific brutal realities. In Raqqa, Syria, we faced the challenge of private shelter repairs for light and medium damages. We used a lump sum contract where a qualified engineer defined the bill of quantities and technical drawings. By having a framework contractor pre-vetted, we could deploy repairs the moment a neighborhood became safe, rather than waiting for a new tender for every house. For a sense of scale, look at UNICEF's Global Supply Division. They manage the procurement of 2.4 billion of vaccines doses annually for over 100 countries. They use framework agreements for vaccines and cold chain equipment. This creates predictability in market where a single outbreak can send demand skyrocketing, allowing UNICEF to place call-offs orders the moment a need arises. When I managed water tracking in the Azaz district in Syria, we faced hyper volatility. You cannot lock a tracking price for 2 years when fuel prices change every 6 hours. Our solution was a fixed price contract with economic price adjustment, where we indexed the service against the local cost of fuel. This protected the contractor from bankruptcy and protected our donors from overpaying when fuel prices dropped. Instead of a static rate, the agreement includes clauses that allow prices to fluctuate based on specific market triggers. For example, for services which I have already mentioned, such as water tracking in the Azaz district, a baseline price is established at the time of the tender based on the current market price of fuel. As the local price of fuel rises or falls, the unit price paid to the transporter is automatically adjusted according to a pre agreed formula, ensuring the contractor's margins remain stable without overspending donor funds. Now, pivot to the corporate world. Business use framework agreements too. They call them master agreements, umbrella contracts, or blanket purchase orders. But the logic here shifts from emergency speed to competitive advantage. Look at Apple. During the 2020 semiconductor shortage, the entire world was starving for chips. Apple didn't wait for the storm to pass. They leaned on multi year contracts backed by billions of dollars in commitments to secure priority access to production capacity. Apple didn't just have an agreement, they had the vertical integration. They designed their own M1 and MP chips to reduce reliance on third party makers like Intel. Their framework agreements guaranteed them a massive share of the world's most advanced 5 nanometer and 3 nanometer chip making capacity. While automakers were losing 210 billions because they lacked of $2 chips, Apple's Mac sales grew 40% in 2021. Then there is Toyota, the company that wrote the book on just in time manufacturing. In 2011, the tsunami shattered their supply chain, and Toyota adapted by evolving JT into a resilient buffer model. They used collaborative framework agreements to build strategic buffer stocks for high risk components like microchips. Toyota's supply chain became one that bent but didn't break, allowing them to recover faster than any competitor. IKEA uses international framework agreements to manage a supply chain so complex it could be its own Netflix series. Let's look at the why and the how across these two sectors. Commitment. In the humanitarian sector, there is zero purchase commitment. In the private sector, agreements are often backed by billions in guarantees to secure capacity, but not always. In Liebherr, we actually and actively use blanket purchase orders with a predetermined amount in order to avoid creating many purchase orders for $50 items. Item complexity. Humanitarians use frameworks for all types of complexity. For example, recurring items like borehole flushing in Nigeria or stationary in Iraq. Most of the businesses use them for high risk, high value assets like aircraft engines or advanced semiconductors. But not all of them. Again, at Liebherr, we use blanket purchase orders also for recurring spends. Duration. Aid agencies strictly limit agreements to 2 years to prevent market distortion. Most businesses build decade-long strategic partnership to shape the future of technology. However, again, in the example of Liebherr, we use them for the specific amount. Thus, these blankets POs are also limited. Strategic driver. For an aid agency, the driver is speed and cost stability during a crisis. For businesses like Airbus, the driver is innovation and supply security. Here is the fascinating comparison. Airbus builds aircraft with millions of parts. They use general terms and conditions of supply as their operational framework. For high value items like engines or avionics, they sign specific agreements which look like framework agreements that locks in volumes and performance KPIs. Humanitarian agencies do the exact same thing. For instance, I did that for truck rental and handling services in northeast Syria. It's the same choreography, just different music. For Airbus, a late delivery stalls a production line and costs millions. For an aid agency, a late delivery of medical kits costs life. We must be honest. These agreements are not a panacea. When they fail, they fail. In the UK, the collapse of giant Carillion is a stark warning. They had an over reliance on a massive web of framework contracts that contributed to regulatory failure and costly project delays. When the frameworks were poorly structured, they shifted too much risk to the public sector, leading to a collapse. During the Syria and Yemen crisis, some agencies found themselves locked into framework agreements that were too rigid. When funding changed or the front line moved, these agencies couldn't adapt, leading to misaligned aid and program cuts. In Raqqa, if a contractor's capacity was wiped out by sudden escalation and we didn't have a multi supplier framework, our entire shelter program would have stopped. In the humanitarian sector, the biggest legal risk is supply misunderstanding. If a local vendor, for instance, in Damaturu, Nigeria, signs an agreement and expects a guaranteed income that never comes, it leads to legal conflict and damage to local relationship. Thus, transparency about the non-binding nature is mission critical from day one. If a supplier feels locked in for years, their performance can begin to erode. This is why performance monitoring, KPIs, and regular audits are not optional. They are the lifeblood of a healthy framework agreement. Based on my experience and years in the field and the boardroom, here is the playbook for world class framework agreements. First, digital transformation is mandatory. We are moving away from tracking spending in dedicated Excel files. The best organizations use ERP systems like, for instance, Link, ERP specifically designed and developed by humanitarians for humanitarians to gain real time visibility into cumulative spending. You need a dashboard that tells you the moment you are about to breach a procurement threshold. Master the min max indicator. When you ask for a quotation for generator maintenance in Nigeria, don't just guess a number. Give suppliers a minimum and maximum range. This clarity gives you the leverage to negotiate gradual volume discounts, where the price per unit drops as your total spending increases. The 6 months reality check. In the markets which are non-stable, like vehicle maintenance or fuel, you must include a provision for review every 6 months. This allows you to reopen competition or renegotiate terms so you do not bankrupt your supplier or overpay during a market shift. Forecast with a margin. Underestimating your consumption is an administrative self inflicted wound. Underestimation leads to significant additional work and potential retendering in the middle of a crisis. Always keep a margin in your maximum quantity estimates. Embrace vertical integration for critical items. Follow the Apple model for your most critical assets. Apple didn't just sign an agreement for chips, they designed their own. While an aid agency might not design its own rice, we can preposition stocks or engage in long term supplier partnership that resembles vertical integration. As we conclude, I want you to remember the strength of your response during a crisis is only as strong as the agreements you put in place, long before the world starts shaking. Framework agreements are not glamorous. They are not mentioned in the news. They are quiet, invisible scaffolding that supports our global society. They provide the predictability that creates speed. And in our world, speed doesn't just save money, speed saves lives. Thank you for joining me on Humanitarian Supply Chain Podcast. I'm Irina Lukyanova, and I hope you found this podcast insightful. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, or share it with a friend. Have questions or ideas for future topics? Reach out on social media or email. I'd love to hear from you. The real power of procurement is not in the purchase. The real power is in preparation. Stay curious, stay resilient, and keep building the future. One agreement, one partnership, and one life saving delivery at a time.